Emily had stopped expecting surprises from her husband. Life with Daniel was not bad. It was stable, calm, predictable. They both worked long hours in Chicago. Evenings were often quiet, sometimes too quiet. Dinner, dishes, television, sleep. Weekends were filled with errands and small talk. Nothing was wrong, but something was missing. So when Daniel walked into the kitchen one Friday evening with a grin she had not seen in months, Emily noticed immediately. He was holding 2 plane tickets. "Packed your bags," he said, placing them gently on the counter. "We're leaving." Sunday morning, Emily blinked. "Leaving? For where?" "Napa Valley," he said proudly. "For days. Just us." The words hit her softly. Just us. Her heart lifted in a way that surprised her. Napa Valley was a place she had once shown him on her phone years ago. Rolling vineyards, quiet mornings, wine tastings at sunset. It was the kind of trip couples took when they wanted to reconnect. "You planned this?" she asked carefully. "Course," he said, stepping closer. "You deserve it." For the first time in a long while, Emily felt seen. The next 2 days felt different. She moved through their apartment with quiet excitement. She packed light summer dresses, sandals, and the silver necklace Daniel had given her on their first anniversary. She even bought a new shade of lipstick she thought he might notice. On Sunday morning, they headed to the airport before sunrise. The sky over Chicago was pale pink, and the air was cool. Daniel carried their bags. He seemed relaxed, almost playful. On the plane, he reached for her hand during takeoff. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. For those few hours in the air, it felt like they were younger again. Like the early days of their marriage when everything felt easy, Emily allowed herself to imagine the trip ahead. Slow mornings, long talks, maybe even a little spark returning between them. When they landed in California, the warm air greeted them like a welcome. Emily smiled as they walked through the airport. She felt light, hopeful. But Daniel suddenly slowed down near the exit. He raised his hand and waved. "Over here." Emily followed his gaze. 3 men stood near the curb, laughing loudly. Mark, Jason, and Trevor, Daniel's college friends. The ones he rarely saw but always spoke about with bright energy. Her steps stopped. Before she could process what was happening, the men rushed forward, hugging Daniel and clapping him on the back. "You actually made it happen," Mark shouted. Jason grinned at Emily. "Surprise, couples trip." Emily felt the word land. Heavily, couples trip. 2 women stepped forward behind the men. Rachel, Mark's wife, offered a warm smile. Lauren, Jason's girlfriend, waved politely. Trevor stood alone, hands in his pockets. Daniel turned to Emily, excitement still on his face. "I thought it would be fun," he said. "A group getaway. Everyone's been talking about it for months. Emily forced a small smile. "You didn't mention that part." "I wanted it to be a surprise," he replied quickly. She nodded, but something inside her shifted. This wasn't what she had imagined. She had pictured quiet. Dinners and private walks, not loud greetings and shared plans. Still, she didn't want to ruin the mood. She told herself it could still be nice. Maybe she was overthinking it. They loaded their bags into 2 SUVs and drove toward Napa Valley. The landscape changed from highways to open fields and finally to endless rows of grapevines stretching. Across golden hills, the rental house was beautiful. Large windows, wooden floors, a wide patio overlooking the valley. It looked like something from a magazine. Everyone seemed thrilled. Music started playing. Mark opened a bottle of wine almost immediately. Jason began telling a story from their college days. Daniel laughed loudly, a deep, carefree laugh Emily had not heard in years. She watched him from across the patio. He looked younger somehow. Lighter, Rachel came to stand beside her. "It's nice, isn't it?" she said gently. "It is," Emily replied. But her voice felt distant, even to herself. As the afternoon turned into evening, the group settled into easy conversation. They talked about old memories, jobs, travel stories. Emily tried to join in, but most of the stories were from a time before her. Daniel was in his element. He teased Trevor. He joked with Mark. He seemed completely at home. At one point, Emily caught his eye across the patio. She expected him to come over, maybe sit beside her. Instead, he turned back to the conversation. She felt a quiet sting. Dinner was lively. They ordered takeout from a nearby restaurant and ate outside as the sun dipped below the hills. Sky turned orange, then soft purple. It was beautiful, but Emily felt strangely invisible. After dinner, the group lit a small fire pit in the backyard. The air cooled and everyone gathered around with blankets and glasses of wine. Daniel sat between Mark and Jason, deep in conversation. Emily sat beside Rachel, listening more than speaking. Rachel leaned closer. "Was this part of the plan?" she asked quietly. Emily hesitated. "No, I thought it was just us." Rachel nodded slowly. Men sometimes forget that surprises are better when shared. Emily gave a faint smile. She didn't want to seem dramatic. She didn't want to complain, but she couldn't ignore the disappointment growing inside her. Later. That night, they finally went to their room. It was large and comfortable, with a balcony overlooking the valley. The moonlight spilled across the bed. Daniel collapsed onto the mattress with a satisfied sigh. "This is going to be such a good trip," he said. Emily stood by the window, looking out at the dark hills. "It's beautiful," she replied softly. He didn't notice the difference in her tone. Within minutes, Daniel was asleep. Emily remained awake. She replayed the moment at the airport in her mind, the excitement on his face, the way he had assumed she would love the idea. He hadn't meant to hurt her, but he hadn't asked what. She wanted either. She realized something then: it wasn't about the friends. It was about feeling included, feeling considered. She had hoped for time alone with him, time to talk without distractions. Time to reconnect. Instead, she felt like an extra guest in someone else's reunion. Outside, she could still hear laughter. Drifting up from the patio, Daniel's voice stood out clearly among the others. He sounded so alive. Emily wondered when she had last heard that tone directed at her. She walked quietly onto the balcony and wrapped her arms around herself. The air was cool, the valley silent, except for the distant sound of voices. She wasn't angry, she was just sad. Not because the trip was ruined, but because she had realized how far apart they had drifted without noticing. Daniel thought this grand surprise would bring excitement back into their marriage. Emily had only wanted something simple, his full attention. As she stood under the wide California sky, she made a quiet promise to herself. She wouldn't let this trip pass without saying how she felt. Because if she stayed silent now, the distance between them would only grow. And this beautiful place, meant to bring them closer, might end up revealing just how far apart they had become. The next morning, Emily woke before everyone else. Soft sunlight poured through the curtains, painting the room in warm gold. Daniel was still asleep beside her, breathing slow and steady. For a moment, she watched him. His face looked peaceful, younger somehow. It reminded her of the man she married, hopeful, driven, kind. She slipped out of bed quietly and stepped onto the balcony. The valley stretched wide and calm below her. Rows of grapevines lined the hills like neat patterns on fabric. The world felt still, but her heart wasn't. She didn't want to spend the rest of the trip pretending everything was fine. Soon, the house began to wake up. Doors opened, coffee brewed. Laughter returned. By 8, everyone was gathered around the long wooden table. Outside, plates filled with eggs and toast. Daniel looked energized again. He was already discussing the day's plan to wineries before lunch. One private tasting in the afternoon, dinner downtown. Sounds perfect, Mark said. Emily stirred her coffee quietly. Daniel glanced at her. You good with that? It was the first time he had asked her anything since they arrived. She nodded. Sure. But inside, she felt like she was watching her own life from a distance. The group headed out mid-morning. The first winery was beautiful, with tall trees lining the driveway and soft music playing near the entrance. Everyone posed for photos. Glasses were raised, compliments were exchanged. Emily smiled when the camera turned toward her, but her mind was somewhere else. Daniel walked beside her at first, but soon he was pulled into another story with Jason. They walked ahead, laughing. Emily slowed down. Trevor noticed and fell into step beside her. You don't seem like yourself, he said gently. I'm just tired, she replied. He gave her a thoughtful look. Daniel's been looking forward to this for months. She turned to him. Months. Yeah, he kept saying he wanted to do something big for you, something special. Her chest tightened slightly. He talks about how strong you are, Trevor continued. Says you hold everything together. Emily forced a small smile. Strong, stable, reliable. All good things, but she didn't want to be the strong one all the time. She wanted to be the one someone reached for. The second winery was quieter. While the others gathered near the tasting counter, Emily stepped outside to the garden area. There was a wooden bench under a large tree. She sat down and let out a slow breath. Footsteps approached. It's time. It was Daniel. He stood in front of her, hands in his pockets. You keep disappearing, he said softly. I needed air. She replied. He sat beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't angry. It was heavy. Are you upset about something? He finally asked. Emily looked straight ahead at the vines stretching into the distance. Thought this trip was for us, she said calmly. It is, he answered quickly. She turned to face him. Is it? Daniel frowned slightly. Of course. I planned it for you. You planned it, she said gently. But you didn't plan it with me. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I wanted time alone with you, she continued. Distractions. No old stories I'm not part of. Just us. The words came out steady, but her heart was racing. Daniel looked down at his hands. I thought this would be more exciting, he admitted. I thought you'd love a big surprise. I don't need big, she said quietly. I need close. The honesty hung between them. For the first time since they arrived, Daniel seemed to really hear her. I didn't realize you felt this way, he said. That's because we haven't really talked in months, she replied. He exhaled slowly, like something had finally clicked. They walked back to the group, but the mood had shifted. Daniel was quieter now, more thoughtful. That evening, after dinner, the group decided to walk to a small overlook near the house. The sky was clear, full of stars. The path was narrow, lit only by soft outdoor lights. Halfway there, Daniel slowed his steps until he was beside Emily again. Can we hang back? He asked. She nodded. The others continued ahead, their voices fading into the distance. For the first time all trip, they were alone. I'm sorry, Daniel said, his voice low but steady. Emily felt her throat tighten. I thought doing something grand would fix things, he continued. I didn't realize things needed fixing. She looked at him carefully. They don't need fixing. They need attention. He reached for her hand. She'll let him hold it. I miss you, he said simply. The words surprised her. You see me every day, she replied. That's not the same as being with you, he said. The honesty in his tone broke something open inside her. I miss us too, she admitted. I miss feeling like we choose each other on purpose. Daniel nodded slowly. I got comfortable. I thought stable meant safe, and safe is good, she said. But safe without connection feels lonely. They stood there under the open sky, facing truths they had both avoided. Want you to feel invisible, he said. I don't want to feel like an extra in your life, she replied. He stepped closer. You're not an extra. You're the reason I wanted this trip in the first place." She searched his face, looking for doubt. She found none. The next morning, Daniel made a quiet announcement at breakfast. "We're going to skip today's group plans," he said casually. "I booked something else." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Oh, just something for Emily and me." There was a short pause, then Rachel smiled knowingly. About time, no one argued. An hour later, Daniel and Emily drove away alone. The road wound through quiet hills until they reached a smaller vineyard, one that felt private and peaceful. A guide met them and led them through rows of vines. The air smelled sweet and fresh. There were no loud voices, no interruptions. Just them. They walked slowly, fingers intertwined. They talked about simple things at first: work, family, plans for the rest of the year. Then the conversation deepened. "I've been stressed about providing," Daniel admitted. "I thought if I kept things stable, that was enough." "I don't need perfect," Emily said. "I need present." He nodded. They sat under a large oak tree with a small picnic arranged for them: bread, cheese, fruit, and 2 glasses of wine. Nothing fancy, everything quiet. Daniel looked at her like he hadn't in a long time, focused, steady. "I don't want to lose what we have," he said. "You're not losing it," she replied. "But we have to protect it." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. It was a small gesture, but it felt meaningful. "I choose you," he said softly. The words warmed her more than the sunlight. "I choose you too," she answered. They stayed there longer than planned, talking about dreams they had forgotten to share, weekend trips they never took, goals they never discussed. By the time they returned to the house that evening, something had shifted. The friends were still there. The laughter continued. But Emily didn't feel invisible anymore. Daniel stayed, close to her, not out of guilt, but intention. When he laughed, he included her. When he told stories, he pulled her into them. The group energy felt lighter. That night, as the sun set over Napa Valley, Emily stood beside Daniel on the patio. The sky burned orange and pink. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "No more surprise group trips without asking," he said with a faint smile. She laughed softly. "Deal." The trip had not gone the way she imagined. It had gone deeper. It had forced them to say what they had been holding back. And as the last light faded over the hills, Emily realized something important. It doesn't fade in one moment. It fades in silence. And it grows again when 2 people decide to speak and listen. This vacation had not just been about wine or friends. It had been about remembering why they chose each other in the first place. And this time they chose with open eyes.